All right, last time we looked at directional force. Now we're going to take a look at size, scale, and proportion. You might already be familiar with some of these terms, but let's try to define them. Size. The physical dimensions of an object. Good. What about scale? Right, it's the comparative size of an element of art or object in relation to other elements or objects. Finally, proportion. There's only one option left, so it's obviously the relationship of the sizes of parts to each other and to the whole artifact. So a lot of this is about not just how big something is, but how big it is in comparison to or in relation to something else. Some objects are monumental in size, like some of the sculptures in our sculpture park, or like this spoon bridge and cherry up in Minneapolis. Other objects are minuscule in size, like these two. On the left is Gretchen Cochran's Pleasant Lake bodice from 1995, which is just a couple of inches tall and delicately pinned to the wall. On the right is the so-called Venus of Willendorf, one of the earliest works of art known. How large do you think that object might be? In fact, it could actually fit in the palm of your hand, it's so small. Scholars think that its small size relates to its purpose as a fertility object that could be carried around from place to place. See, back in 30,000 BCE, people were nomadic, which means they didn't settle down in one area, but instead kept traveling from place to place in search of food. Scale means the comparative size of an element of art or object in relation to other elements or objects. So it's in relation to something or someone else. You might see people put a penny in a photograph next to something to give you an idea of the scale. We all know how big a penny is, so seeing a penny next to an object helps us understand its size and scale. In this example by Jeff Koons, he's actually designed this monumental piece and given us an idea of its scale by putting little people at the bottom. So that's one way that you can give an indication of scale for a project that's meant to be very large. Here, the Statue of Liberty appears huge in scale in relation to the skyline of New York in the background. But this gives us a misleading understanding of scale, since in reality, we know that those skyscrapers are much taller than the Statue of Liberty. In this photograph, Richard Misrach zooms out on the swimmer to make them look very, very small in comparison to the vast body of water. Proportion is the relationship between the sizes of parts to each other and to the whole artifact. We can talk about proportions being realistic, as they are in the sculpture on the left, or as exaggerated, as they are on the right. Cartoons and caricatures tend to exaggerate proportions for expressive effect, or to emphasize certain features. Dwayne Michaels played around with proportions here by having his subject hold a magnifying glass up to his face for the photograph, making part of his face look exaggerated. In this artwork by Jacob Lawrence, the artist emphasized the proportion of the hands in relation to the rest of the women's bodies, and he also made the keys on the typewriters larger in proportion to the rest of the machine, in order to remind us that they're typists. Back in ancient Greece, artists developed systems of measurement to find the ideal proportions for the human body. They used the head as an increment of measurement, so they'd say, I believe the ideal human body should be 7 heads tall, on the left, for example. And another guy would come along and say, no, I think the ideal human body should be 8 heads tall. These are the kinds of arguments they had in ancient Greece, apparently. You can see how by adding an additional head, the figure on the right has proportions that are a little bit leaner and elongated. Basically, you can break down the entire body into geometric proportions, although you can see that the proportions of the human body at different ages look different. Babies, for example, have heads that are larger in proportion to the rest of their body. And you can work out proportions of the human face, too. I did this with a photo of myself. So what do you think? Is my head in proportion? Are my features proportionate? I'm supposed to be following the diagram on the left, but as you can see, it's not exactly a 1-for-1. That's of course because each human head is different. You can't exactly follow a formula when everyone's head is going to be slightly different in proportion. We know that each face is different and everyone has different proportions. This is something that the artist Adrienne Piper, who is biracial, played with in her self-portrait here from 1981. Perhaps you've heard of the golden ratio? The formula is A plus B is to A as A is to B. Now, I'm not a math whiz or anything, but if you follow that formula, the idea is that you'll create harmonious proportions that are pleasing to the eye. This idea has roots in ancient Greece as well. You can create a rectangle with the most pleasing proportions by adhering to the golden section and following the directions written down here. And some scholars believe that this has determined some of the most famous works of ancient Greece, such as the Parthenon, or even more recent works like this painting by Salvador Dali, which we can break down into two interconnected golden rectangles. This ratio and the spiral have connections to what we see in nature as well, and has formed the basis for some monumental man-made structures, such as the Great Mosque of Samarra in Iraq. Even Frank Lloyd Wright's Guggenheim Museum in New York was influenced by this form as well. All right, so let's put our knowledge to the test now. How would you describe the size, scale, and proportions of this example? All right, so that's it for this week. I'm gonna go back and finish up my pina colada, so please excuse me. I'll see you next week. Everyone take care and let me know if you have any questions as always.